Whispers over the water. The first time I heard them, I told myself it was only the wind. Wind has a way of tricking the ears, especially over water. It carries sound strangely, bending voices where none exist, stretching silence into something that feels alive. That's what I told myself, even as every hair on my arms lifted and every instinct begged me not to stay. It was late summer, one of those evenings when the lake seemed endless, a mirror of dull gray beneath a heavy sky. The air was thick, almost syrupy, carrying the scent of pine resin and wet soil. I remember how the trees pressed close to the shoreline, their reflections trembling faintly on the surface, blurred as though the water itself resisted clarity. I had set out in a small rowboat, no real purpose other than to pass the time. The lake had been my retreat for years, a place I could sit with the patient rhythm of casting a line, listening to the world soften into stillness. That night, though, the stillness felt different. The air was too quiet. The insects that normally buzzed near the reeds had fallen silent, and the distant croak of frogs was nowhere to be heard. The silence was whole, consuming, and yet it was not empty. I dropped anchor in the middle of the lake, where the water was blackest. The rope rattled through my hands, damp and gritty, before pulling taut with a muted groan. I let my line slip into the water, watched it vanish without ripple, swallowed by a surface that seemed thicker than liquid, as though it were oil rather than water. At first, nothing happened, only the soft lapping of water against the hull and the occasional creak of the oarlocks. Then I noticed the air had shifted. The faintest vibration touched my skin, the same feeling you get when a deep note resonates through a wall. My ears strained instinctively, and that's when I heard it. Whispers. Soft, broken murmurs curling just above the surface, carried across the lake in strands that twined together, then drifted apart. I leaned forward, straining to hear, though part of me wished I hadn't. The words were indistinct, a language I didn't recognize, if it was a language at all. It was breath without form, the sound of lips close to the ear though no one was near. The air chilled. My breath fogged faintly in front of me, though it was still summer. The smell shifted too. What had been pine and damp earth grew heavier, metallic, tinged with the sour bite of something decaying. My stomach turned. The whispers grew clearer. Not louder, but sharper, like threads weaving into something deliberate. They seemed to come from all directions, curling around the boat, some distant, some near enough to feel warm against my skin. I gripped the edge of the hull, nails digging into the damp wood, fighting the rising certainty that the voices were not above the water but beneath it. I told myself it was the lake carrying sound from the far shore, though I could see no lights, no fires, no signs of people. Only the mist gathering along the treeline, pale and creeping, thickening with each breath. Then something tugged at the line. It wasn't the playful nibble of a fish. It was steady, deliberate, pulling down with slow, unyielding force. The rod bent toward the surface, the line humming with tension. My pulse quickened as I braced, reeling slowly, but what rose from below was not a catch I could name. The water swirled, dark shapes stirring just beneath the surface. I saw pale outlines, shifting too fast to focus on, faces maybe distorted, mouths opening and closing as though speaking the whispers aloud. The shapes pressed upward, never breaking the surface, as though held just beneath by some unseen barrier. Their eyes, if they were eyes, seemed to lock onto me, round and hollow, darker than the water that contained them. The whispers grew frantic, dozens of threads winding into a chorus that filled my skull. My temples throbbed with pressure, my vision dimming at the edges. I staggered back, nearly toppling the boat, the line still taut in my hands. With one final wrench, the rod jerked free of my grip, vanishing into the black with a hiss of snapping line. I froze, listening to the hollow splash echo into silence. Then came another sound, soft, wet, and deliberate. A drip followed by another. I turned, and the back of the boat was damp, water running in rivulets though no wave had splashed aboard. Each droplet fell with purpose, as if something unseen climbed silently into the boat with me. The wood creaked, not from my own movement, but from weight pressing down. My breath caught. I could feel the shift, the subtle tilt of the hull, as though someone else crouched unseen, only a few feet away. The whispers swirled closer, brushing my ears, my neck, until I could almost feel the damp exhalations. I stumbled toward the bow, hands fumbling for the anchor rope, desperate to pull free. The rope was wet, slicker than it should have been, the fibers oozing with something dark that stained my skin. My grip faltered, and as I pulled, the line didn't rise. It lowered. The anchor rope was dragging me down. The hull shuddered, boards straining, as though the lake itself had clenched its hold on the boat. I felt the pull grow stronger, cold water splashing over the rim as the boat sank inch by inch. I clawed at the rope, the fibers biting into my palms, but it only pulled harder. The whispers crescendoed into a fever pitch, filling the air with 1,000 urgent voices, all pressing closer, all urging me to let go. I did. The rope snapped free from my hands, vanishing into the water with a violent jerk. The boat rocked violently, throwing me against the side. I gasped, pulling myself upright, but the whispers didn't fade. They rose from the surface now, loud and immediate, circling me in a ring of sound. The water rippled, not from wind, not from current, but from beneath. Faces broke the surface, dozens of them, pale and bloated, eyes open but unseeing. Their mouths moved in unison, the whispers now clear, though still impossible to understand. I watched in horror as more surfaced, surrounding the boat, a crowd of drowned figures mouthing words that had no source. Their lips moved faster. The voices grew shrill, desperate, until I pressed my hands against my ears, tears streaming from the pressure in my skull. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed instantly, lost in their endless chorus. The boat lurched again, this time tilting sharply. Water poured over the side, icy against my legs. The faces drew closer, drifting toward the hull, hands rising just beneath the surface. Long fingers, pale and boneless, reached upward, brushing the underside of the boat, tapping in patterns that matched the cadence of the whispers. I tried to row, to move, but the oars were gone. The locks were empty, splintered as though ripped away. My chest tightened as panic clawed up my throat. I was trapped, adrift in a circle of faceless mouths that whispered without end. The mist closed in, swallowing what little horizon remained. The shore was gone. The sky was gone. There was only the lake, the whispers, and the pale faces pressing closer, closer, until the water lapped against the rim. I don't remember the final moment clearly, only the sensation of cold hands wrapping around my ankles, the sudden weight pulling me down, the lake swallowing me whole. My lungs burned as water rushed in, the whispers flooding not just my ears but my mind, filling every corner of thought with voices that weren't mine. And then silence. When I opened my eyes, there was no boat, no surface, no sky. Only the endless black of water stretching in every direction, pale figures drifting in the distance, their mouths still moving though no sound remained. I realized then that the whispers hadn't stopped. They had only moved inside me. And I knew with a certainty that cut deeper than fear that I was only the next to join them. The Forgotten Lake. There is a place hidden deep in the woods, so far from any road or trail that most maps don't bother to mark it anymore. The locals call it the Forgotten Lake, though I never heard anyone speak the name aloud without lowering their voice, as if it wasn't meant to be remembered. I found it by accident, or at least I told myself I did, though sometimes I wonder if it had been waiting for me. It began with a path. I had been hiking deeper than usual that day, further than common sense would recommend. The trees pressed close overhead, branches thick and heavy with moss that dripped with beads of stagnant rainwater. The smell of wet earth clung to me, mixed with the faint sourness of something rotting under the leaves. That was when I noticed a narrow track, little more than a break in the undergrowth, leading away from the main trail. Something about it unsettled me even then. The air along that track felt colder, heavier, as though stepping onto it meant entering a place outside the rhythm of the forest. My boots sank into the soil with a soft squelch, and the sound echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet. Every step felt like intrusion. It took longer than I expected. The path wound and twisted, the trees bending inward until their trunks leaned at strange angles, roots crossing over one another like the veins of some ancient body. I should have turned back, but curiosity has always been my downfall. When the trees finally broke, I found myself standing on a shoreline that seemed to stretch farther than it had any right to. The Forgotten Lake lay before me, vast and still, its surface flat as glass. The water was black, so dark that it didn't reflect the sky but swallowed it instead, leaving nothing but a void stretching to the horizon. The air smelled different there, metallic like rust and blood, mixed with the sweetness of decay. My stomach churned, though I forced myself to breathe deeper, trying to ignore the sensation that each breath thickened in my lungs. The silence was absolute, heavier than the stillness of any other lake I had known. No birds circled above, no insects skimmed the surface, no frogs croaked from the reeds. It was as if the world had been drained of sound. I stepped closer to the water's edge. The mud sucked at my boots, thick and clinging, as though reluctant to let me go. The reeds here were brittle and gray, snapping like bones beneath my weight. When I crouched, dipping my fingers into the water, the cold was so sharp it burned. I pulled back instantly, but the sensation lingered, sinking deep into my bones. That was when I noticed the dock. It jutted out from the far side of the lake, half hidden by mist, its boards warped and pale with rot. I don't know why I hadn't seen it at first. It seemed impossible to miss. Perhaps the fog had shifted, or perhaps it hadn't wanted to be seen until that moment. The longer I stared, the more I felt drawn toward it, though every instinct in me screamed to stay away. Still, I followed the shoreline until I reached it. The dock groaned under my weight, the wood slick with a thin layer of slime. Each step threatened to send me plunging through, but somehow it held. The water beneath was too dark, too still, reflecting nothing but the suggestion of shapes moving far below the surface. My skin prickled as I leaned over, staring into the depths. There was no bottom, only blackness. It was then that I heard it. A sound like breath, low and steady, rising from beneath the dock. At first I thought it was the lake exhaling, but then it shifted, splintering into faint murmurs. Whispers, too faint to understand but unmistakably human. They rose with the mist, curling around me like fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I froze. The dock quivered faintly under invisible weight, as if someone walked just behind me. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. Only the boards stretching back to shore, empty and pale. Yet the whispers didn't stop. They slid into my ears, into the marrow of my bones, filling the silence with words I couldn't comprehend, but somehow felt I wasn't supposed to. My line of sight drifted downward again to the water. Shapes shifted below, pale and bloated, drifting just beneath the surface. Faces, maybe though distorted, stretched, their mouths moving in time with the whispers. Dozens of them, their eyes round and dark, staring upward without blinking. The dock shuddered. I staggered, catching myself against the rail, though my palms slid across damp slime that clung to my skin like oil. The smell of decay thickened, heavy and suffocating. My throat tightened as if the air itself had curdled. I don't remember kneeling, but suddenly I was closer to the water, closer to the faces pressing against the underside of the surface. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent, words threading together into something almost comprehensible. They wanted me to listen. They wanted me to lean closer. My reflection appeared among them. But it wasn't my reflection. Its mouth was open, stretched too wide, its eyes black hollows. It stared at me with a hunger I could feel pulling at my skin. When it moved, it wasn't in time with me. It was faster, sharper, as though mocking every delayed blink, every staggered breath. I reeled back, stumbling across the boards. The dock screamed beneath me, splitting with sharp cracks, as though something massive pressed against it from below. Water surged upward between the planks, icy spray soaking my legs. The whispers became a roar, not louder in volume, but deeper, vibrating through the wood, through my bones, through the very air. I felt them in my chest, in my skull, filling me until my own thoughts drowned beneath them. The lake began to rise, not in waves, but in columns, pillars of black water lifting upward as though hands reached from beneath. They surrounded the dock, closing me in, their surfaces rippling with pale faces that pressed outward like trapped things desperate to escape. My legs moved on their own, carrying me back toward the shore, but the dock stretched longer than it should have. Every step only led to more boards, more creaking planks slick with slime. I turned, and the shore was gone, swallowed by mist. The lake had taken it away, leaving me stranded in the center of nothing. Cold fingers brushed my ankle. I kicked, heart hammering, but nothing broke the surface. Only the black water, still and waiting. The whispers coiled tighter, threading into a single command that I could almost understand. A command to join them, to sink, to forget. The boards cracked. I dropped to my knees as the dock split apart, water gushing through the widening gaps. My hands scrambled for something to hold, but the wood was slick, breaking apart under my grip. And then I fell. The water swallowed me whole, a cold so sharp it erased thought. My scream was nothing but bubbles rising into darkness. The whispers didn't vanish. They grew clearer, filling me from within, drowning me in their endless chorus. Faces surrounded me, pale and grinning, their mouths moving in perfect unison. My reflection was among them, its hollow eyes inches from mine. The last thing I remember before the blackness closed was the weight, not just of water, but of countless hands pulling me down, fingers digging into my flesh, dragging me deeper into the forgotten lake. Now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. The whispers don't stop. They never stop. And I know, with the kind of certainty that leaves no room for hope, that the lake doesn't want to be forgotten. It only wants to be fed.